feel like it's picking up every single word you say in case you decide to have a conversation. It should be that way.
That's good then.
Mr. Swain?
Yeah,
You alright?
I'm okay. Yeah, I was just going to say hi to Ken.
Yes.
Yeah,
The man who got you the job.
I
Hello.
talked to you early on. So
Yes, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. Yes, good, thank you.
Yeah, oh great. I've seen a lot of your stuff.
Oh, great. No, it's nice to see you again.
Well, I'm hoping that we'll get a few people because this stuff's really interesting.
Well, I think so, but I'm very biased.
We do so many history talks. History talks. Some of them are brilliant. Well, most of them are brilliant.
Well, I've heard a few, and they've all been really good.
Yeah.
I was here last week, and I thought that was fabulous, considering it was like that thing.
Yeah. Did you come to what's her name? Carol, not Carol. Helen Goods.
The first one.
Uh,
The first one she did.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's very good.
She
She
is
prepares
very
very well.
She's very good. Yeah.
I was working with her on the piracy stories because I got attacked by pirates on my ship. And I gave a little talk here on that. I must do it again.
Yes, yes, I'd be interested in that.
Okay, well, lovely to see you.
And you.
We're going to try to start out. My phone's being used for the stream now, so I don't have the time, so I'm relying on We've got that, and then we've got a wonderful tech operator as well behind the scenes who will give me the thumbs up when it's time to turn the microphone on.
Too much credit.
Yeah, everyone needs to know the amount of speakers who have needed tech help for their talks and such. Well, because they'll hit the slide button and it won't work, or something, and it's not plugged in properly, or the slideshow's not ready.
It's not relevant.
Yeah, it gives us something to look at. Such, yeah. Good question. I'm counting 20 in their seats, and I see another 5 approaching now. So, and typically, a few people will show up a bit after we start as well. So, I'd imagine we're probably in the low to mid 30s by the time you roll into it. One of the advantages, I guess, we don't have the stage fright of looking out and seeing sort of what's around. When you hear the welcoming applause, you'll have a scale. So you'll have a scale. Last shakeout. Well, the bell's usually a good indicator as well. We try to be as close as we can. Ooh, there goes the bell. There goes the bell. Make sure that we'll do an audio. Oh, go a little louder than that. We'll do an audio test. Everyone can hear me fine, I'm imagining. That's good. I have nothing but nods around the room, which is excellent. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Heritage Talk here at Hull Minster. My name is James, I'm the Heritage Manager here, and I'm really delighted to be able to welcome you to the Heritage Talk this week. This is part of our 600th anniversary that we're celebrating this year. If you're new to the Heritage Talks at Hull Minster, we run these every other week on Fridays at around lunchtime, same time every other week. We have a wide variety and range of speakers ranging from local academics to local tour guides, to people with just a passion about history who really want to get the word out about something that they feel very strongly towards. This week we have a particularly interesting topic because we've not quite gone this far back in history in any of our talks yet. We've done a lot of talks about kind of Edwardian, Elizabethan, Victorian England. We've done a lot of talks around wartime Britain as well, but we've not gone quite as far back as the Anglo-Saxon period. So this actually presents really interesting insight and opportunity for us to go way, way, way back in time to many of our roots, really, as a culture and as a people. Good news as well is that our speaker has decided to join us this week, which is great. The unfortunate bit is that I've been told by just about everyone who attended last week's talk that it went absolutely brilliantly. So I was not going to say, I was not going to say half hoping that the speaker didn't turn up today, but round two eventually, we'll see. But I'm really delighted to be able to welcome Kay Godfrey to the stage for her talk about feminine tradition in Anglo-Saxon England, something that is, well, I mean, Kay will obviously say it better than I can, but feminine tradition in Anglo-Saxon England is such a unique thing compared to other cultures on the continent as well. So we'll hopefully learn a lot more about that. I won't take up any more of your time. I'll pass the mic to Kay. Thank you all for attending, those of you who have, and please enjoy. Thank you. Oh, and a round of applause to give her the scale of
Hello. That way. Hello. Thank you ever so much for coming, because I am totally passionate, as James said, on the Anglo-Saxons, have been since a teenager, so a very long time ago. And so I'm really glad to be able to speak to you about Anglo-Saxon England. Just to let you know who I am, my name is Kay Godfrey-James, Kay Godfrey. I am actually local to Hull. I've been living in Hull for the last 4 years, was born up here, moved away, joined the Navy, and became a history teacher. The other thing about me is I am totally blind. So I have to be honest, I can't see any of you, but welcome all of you. So if you would like to say anything, you need to speak up. So I also have to tell you, if you want to sneak out, I can hear you. Okay. Yeah. So, can we move on, please? I have a little helper at the back. So there should be a quote on the screen, which I can't read. So not only am I really interested in Anglo-Saxon England, I'm really interested on the role of women. I always thought that women aren't represented in history, and as that quote, which is a 20th century quote from Stephen Biddulph, I don't think women are voiced. So I've called this talk The Voice of Anglo-Saxon Women, because although we have gone back and we've looked at some of the famous people from history, we don't do much about what's happened in Anglo-Saxon. Okay. Anglo-Saxon England. So what is Anglo-Saxon England? It's a very long time ago. So it started probably around 400, so 400 CE, and it goes up until 1066, 14th of October, about tea time. That's when it ends, yeah? That's when the Normans invaded and we became Norman. It's a long time to actually think about. So if you think about it, it's like me talking about the period between the Wars of the Roses and now. Oh, sorry. And now. So it's a very long time. It's quite difficult. So I have to warn you, I don't have any notes. I've got no way of checking what I'm talking about, so I might go off on a tangent. So please ignore me if I do. I've tried to remember everything, but I do have a habit of just burbling on. So, okay. So Anglo-Saxon England. It did, as I said, about 400. Well, it's any time between 383. In 383, A guy called Magnus Maximus took a load of males, troops, onto the continent, so he emptied England of men. And then in 410, the Romans withdrew. So again, they took a load of men out of the country. So we're basically then an island full of old men, young boys, and women. Now, at the time, we don't have a lot of sources. Next slide, please. So we don't have a lot of sources. So how do I know what was happening in Anglo-Saxon England? It's really difficult to find out, to find those, that evidence. And the way we get the sources from is we look at the archaeology, we look at place names, and also there are some writings, but very few. People in Anglo-Saxon England in the 5th century couldn't read or write. In fact, they didn't even know that they couldn't read or write because they didn't know a thing about writing. All they did was talk. There was lots of talking, lots of poetry. They would talk around a fire. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were by Homer. It's the same sort of thing. Beowulf started off like that. Beowulf is a poem. It's written down, but it started off being oral. So there's lots of these oral traditions. They would use rhyming couplets, or they would use groups of 3. So, for example, one of those rhyming couplets is the origin of the county of Kent. Now, the county of Kent was founded by Hengist and Horsa, rhyming couplet. You can believe it or not. I don't particularly believe in Hengist and Horsa because Hengist means stallion and Horsa means horse. So, I don't know. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But there's these traditions that were brought up, so a lot of it is not actually, I'm going to say not actually true, but I like the idea of that tradition of what happened. And they came in 3 ships, and they came in 33 ships, and they carried 60. You get my idea. So it's an oral way of remembering. So, what have we got on the screen? Right. Okay. Anglo-Saxon, where does that come from? Well, they didn't call themselves Anglo-Saxons. In about 450, because we've got all these old people, women, young children, people thought that they could attack. Now, we were open to attack, so we had the Picts coming from Ireland. Start again. The Picts coming from Scotland, and the Scots coming from Ireland. I'm sorry, I keep hitting it. So the Scots coming from Ireland, just to confuse us. They came in to attack us because we got lots of things they wanted. Lots of jewels, lots of grain, pottery, all that sort of thing that were left over from the Romans. Now, we didn't like that, funnily enough. So what we did, according to a later source, now this source is the Venerable Bede. Now, Bede was writing in the 8th century, and he was a monk. So he wrote the Ecclesiastical History of Britain. So slightly biased, and he was saying that we invited them over, and there was somebody called Vortigern. Now, Vortigern invited mercenaries over to stop us being attacked from the Picts and the Scots. Now, Vortigern actually means mighty ruler, so it probably wasn't his name, but it's a good name. I quite like the name. So we invited them over, and they came over, and they did. They fought off the Picts and the Scots, and that's great, because we were free again. And this is the time that we have King Arthur, which is a whole different story, so I'm not going to go into Arthur, but this is that time. So there was lots of fighting going on, lots of tribes fighting. Can I just point out as well that at the time when we talk about an army, we're talking about 30 men. So not what you'd think. So groups of 30 men fighting each other. Now, when the mercenaries came over, they decided they actually liked staying in the country. So they said, do you know what? I'm not going back. Thank you for paying me, and I'm going to stay. So they brought all their families over. And what Bede tells us is there were Anglos, Saxons, and Jutes. Well, he was sort of right. Not totally right. There were others as well. There were Frisians and Sueve, Burgundians. Lots of them came over from an area called what was Germania, which is sort of Germany, North France, and they came over. And they liked it so much. They settled. Now, we didn't particularly like the fact, so the original people that were here, they're called the British. And the people that came over, I'm going to call them the English. Okay? So a lot of the British stayed and intermarried and linked up with. So it started off, there was 2 settlements side by side, and then they integrated. A lot of them moved. So if you think about coming over from Germania, they came over from the west, moved over towards the east, and pushed those British into Wales. And that's where we get Wales from, because they are the Wellas, the original inhabitants of this country moved into Wales, and to be fair, Devon and Cornwall. So what we've got left, and I'm really sorry I keep hitting that. So what we've got left are, can we have the next slide, please?
Slides aren't moving on.
Is it not?
Oh, yeah.
We've got, thank you. We have the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Now, I'm going to call them the heptarchy. I know modern historians don't like that. It's something that was invented. They didn't call themselves it. I quite like it because it makes it simple, and I'm all for simple. So this is the heptarchy. So these are the 7 kingdoms, which you probably have heard of. So if we start off down the bottom, we have Kent, which was the first one. I talked to you about Hengist and Horsa. So we have Kent. Then we've got West Saxons, South Saxons, East Saxons, East Anglia. Right in the middle, we have Mercia, which we are part of here. So that's Mercia. Right in the middle, no borders with the sea. So a bit of a problem for Mercia. And then we've got Northumbria at the top. The sources that I've got, which I should have spoken about before, but never mind. The sources that we have, so we have Bede that I spoke about. We also have another source that wrote in the 6th century called Gildas. Unfortunately, again, a monk. And he wrote a book called On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain. So he's really interesting, but again, extremely biased, talking about the ruin of Britain. And he's talking from a Christian point of view. The problem with Gildas, he doesn't give us any dates. So we have to guess. He does say on one stage, 40 years after I was born, and that's great, but tell us when you were born, Gildas, please, give us a bit of an idea. Probably round about 500, that's when he was probably born. So he's writing at the time. But he doesn't give us any names either. So again, make it up. The next one we have is a guy called Nennius. And he's quite interesting. I quite like Nennius. But he does say, I have heaped together all that I can find. And he has. Sometimes he's put the story in 3 times. Sometimes it's just twice. It's no particular order, so it's not chronological. So that's quite fun, looking at him. And he does make things up, which is quite interesting. But the first actual reference to King Arthur. So he's there. We've also got things called annals or Easter tables, and they're little things that were written by the monks. This happened then, so the night darkened for 2 days and nights, or there was a massive fire, or there was a battle of, and that's all you get. Okay, so we've not got a lot of sources. So it's really difficult to find the voice of women. And it's more difficult because everything was written by men, because the only people that could write were men, because the only people that could write were monks, or very, very rich. And they wrote about Christian things. And that was mainly men. Now, we have got very small glimpses of those women. Now, I've put them all together, and the first one I can come across is St. Hilda of Whitby, and she's local. And she was considered very, very important at the time. And the people that she trained were very, very important. So she was the abbess at Whitby, so she had an important role. But the most important role that she had was in 664. Now, 664 was the Synod of Whitby. And a synod was a church gathering, a church meeting. Now, this synod was a gathering to date Easter. Now, I have to be honest, the first century of Christianity they're always fighting. Lots of fighting about lots of silly things, but some really, really important things. And this was really important to them. How do we date Easter? And it was decided in 664, mainly because of Hilda backing the way it is today. So you can blame her for why we have that curious thing, how we date Easter. So she was really, really important, but we don't know much about her. There is a life of St. Hild, but we don't have copies today intact. So we have little glimpses. Okay. The next century, so we're going into the 8th century, got some evidence of women. My brain's not working. So, sorry, if we go on later, we have the first evidence of the laws of Anglo-Saxon England coming into effect. So there were laws in Anglo-Saxon that actually gave rights to women. So King Athelbert of Kent was the first one to write these laws down. And one of those laws was to enable women to hold their own land, and they could divorce. Now that's really important because women were allowed to have their own land and divorce. Well, that actually, it was repealed later on in the century, and it wasn't given back to women until 1870. So it's really important that those Anglo-Saxons were able to do that. So those women actually had the right. And the first woman that I've come across that had a divorce was from Northumberland. This is where Bede was writing. This is how we know about her. So she was married to King Edgefrith, who was the Lord of Northumbria. And in 670, she basically didn't want to be married to him anymore. And she was granted a divorce by Bishop Wilfrid, and she withdrew to a monastery. Yeah, go girl. Doesn't happen very often that if you're in an unhappy relationship, you can get out of it, but she was able to get out of it. The only downside to it was that she went into a nunnery. It would be really nice if she could have owned her own land and had a happy time afterwards, but she wasn't allowed, but it's pretty cool. Her name was Athelfrith, so it's the first woman that we know of that actually had a divorce. And I'm sure there were more. It's just we don't have their voices so much because, again, written by men, for men, and they weren't interested. So if we move on to the next century, so we're talking about, I want to move on to King Offa. Sorry, did somebody say something? No, King Offa. So King Offa, I'm calling him king because that's what he called himself. He technically wasn't a king. He was the leader of Mercia. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Yeah, he's the one, he's the one that built Offa's Dyke. Very, very powerful lord. They called themselves a leader. He called himself a king because he thought he was better. Bede called to them Imperium. We also use the word Bretwalder, so he was in charge of the whole of the area, but they had their own leaders, and he was just like an overlord. His wife was Cunifrith. Now we know about Cunifrith because in 790 her head was put on the back of a coin. Now you might not think that's very important, but trust me, it's really important. She is the only woman in the whole of the Western Empire in this period that had her head on a coin. It didn't happen. So she must have been important. She was important as a queen. And this is the first time we have this on a coin. So she's very important. I bet you've never heard of her. No. So she... Sorry?
Correct.
Yeah. She is really important. So Queen Cunifrith is the first woman to have done this in the whole of the Western area, so that's really important. Okay. She was actually invited to become Queen of Mercia after Offa died, but they decided they didn't want her, so she went to a nunnery, of course. Yeah. If I tell you as well, in Anglo-Saxon times, it was very different the way they would elect. somebody to lead them. And what they would do is everybody that was born in the royal family, well, all the men that were born in the royal family, were called athelings. So they were royal princes. So they were called athelings. And then when the king, the leader, died, the Wightan, who were the group of intelligent men, so the wise men of the village, would all get around together and they would decide who would be the next leader. Now, invariably, that wasn't the son, because I have to be honest, most of these war leaders died in their 30s or 40s, and their children were not old enough. So it tended to be the brothers or the uncles, not the children of. And that's a good idea, get the best person for the job. But you have all sorts of trouble then, because all of the sons then grow up and go, you missed over me, I want to be leader now. And so there's lots of battles. And the one thing I found that's really funny in Anglo-Saxon history is a lot of these athelings that decide they want to be the new leader. There's a lot of died mysteriously or died suddenly. Can't work out why that happened. Okay, so we move on. So we're going through the centuries so quickly because I don't have that much time to bore you. So we're moving on to the next century. So we're going to talk about the first crowned queen. Now again, I don't know whether you've heard of her. Have you heard of Queen Judith? No, that's good. I like that. So Queen Judith. Now, the king was Athelwulf. Now, he styled himself as King of Wessex. So we're not talking a king like we know it, but he was the leader of Wessex, which is the one down the bottom. Yeah. And he decided that he wanted to go to Rome. A lot of the leaders went to Rome. Some of them are buried there. He didn't get buried, he came back. Now, you might know Athelwulf, you might not. But if I told you he was the father of somebody very famous, have you heard of Alfred?
Yes.
Yay. So we're getting there. So Athelwulf is the father of Alfred. Well, actually, he was the father of 5 sons. So it did get a bit confusing. So Athelwulf comes back from Rome. And I don't know why 5 sons wasn't enough. But his wife Osburh had died, and he decided that he wanted a new wife. And he was in the land of the Franks, Francia, talking to Charles the Bold. And Charles the Bold offered his daughter to be his wife, on the understanding that she was crowned queen. Which is great, because poor old Judith was only 12. So, Athelwulf, at this time, in his 50s, went back. Now, he'd got 5 sons. Let's see if I can remember the 5 sons. Athelstan, Athelbert, Athelbold, Athelred, and Alfred. Thank you. By this time, Athelstan was dead. He must have been in his 30s, and he died. We don't know why. You don't get to know why people die on the main time. So Athelbert was ruling in his stead while his dad went to Wessex. Came back with his new wife. I don't think he was very impressed. Decided he wanted to keep the kingdom and said, "No, Dad, you can't come back." So they split the kingdom. So Athelwulf and his new wife settled in. Unfortunately, only settled for 2 years, and then he dies. So he's probably about 55, 56, 50, somewhere around there. So probably of natural causes, I'll say, this time. And his son took over the whole of Wessex. Now, what he did, he then married Queen Judith. Oh. Yeah, quite. Now, Judith is his stepmom, and in those times, in Christian terms, you don't marry your mother, whether or not they're a stepmother or whatever. It's absolutely wrong. Shouldn't have done that. Bear in mind, she's about 14 at this time, and already a widow. Yeah. So Queen Judith, bless her, so she marries, and she's Queen of Wessex again, crowned queen again, so she is still crowned queen. Luckily for her, or unluckily, I don't know, but her husband only lasts 2 years. And he dies. And I think, bless her, she'd had enough, and she goes, and she ran for it and went back to her dad in Francia. Thank for that. But then it went down to the next son. And then the next son. And by this time, we were getting Viking raids. Next slide, please. So hopefully we've got a slide about Vikings. Yeah. So what happened was we're getting these Viking raids. Now what I want to point out again is they didn't call themselves Vikings. We don't know where Viking comes from. There's 4 or 5 different options. We'll just go with Vikings because it sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah. And they didn't wear the helmets. I don't know if you knew, but that's a myth as well. Sorry if I've spoiled things. They came over. So there were 3 possible areas that they came over. So Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Now the Norwegians tended to go up to Scotland, and they went round Scotland, don't hit the mic, and landed in Ireland. So they invaded Ireland. The Swedish pretty much either came down towards Francia or they went east, and that's where we get Russia founded from. They went to the east. So we got pretty much the Danes. So the first lot that came over, 793, that hit Lindisfarne, they were actually Norwegians, but they had enough by then. And then the Danes came over. Hence, East Anglia was called the Danelaw, because that's where they settled, in East Anglia. They also settled in the north. So you've got Northumbria that was split into 2 kingdoms. So Northumbria split into Deira, which where we were, which was based upon York. And then you've got Bernicia at the top, and that's based around Bamborough. Okay. Now, there's a couple of, and I've forgotten her name, so I can't tell you. I can't remember. Bamborough is actually based on a female... Bevan, thank you. Thank you for my husband, yeah. Queen Bevan, her name was Bevanburg. It came to Bevanburg for Bamborough, and then it changed to Bamborough. And that's where we get the name Bamborough from. So we say, we have these glimpses of the women. Yeah, very tentatively. So as the Vikings are coming in, this is where Alfred supposedly burnt the cakes and took over control. Now you're saying to me, where are the women? Got a really important woman. Next slide, please. No. Okay. Can I just stop there? I mean, I've been going on. Has anybody got any questions? Have I said anything that...
That's good.
No?
All good.
What do we know about the political divisions of Scandinavia? Was there a Denmark and a Norway and a Sweden?
Yes.
There already existed a separate...
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So they have a longer history than we have.
Yes.
So it must relate to climate change or something.
Yeah, they were much more advanced than us as well, because they were able to develop their ships, so the longboats that gave them the ability to come over.
It's another lecture, but I can see.
Sorry?
This is another lecture.
Yes, I'm going. Yeah. Yeah. So they definitely, I'll agree with you. So, Alfred the Great. He wasn't called the Great at the time. He was called, obviously. It'd be great if he was wandering around going, I'm the Great. But he was given that a couple of centuries after he died. And he was called the Great for a couple of reasons. One, because he was particularly good at, I'd say, removing the Danes. He didn't just fight them, though. He did give tribute, so he did give them money to go away, so bribery. So, it worked, so. But he didn't completely get rid of them. As I say, they were in Danelaw. There was the 5 boroughs, so Leicester, Nottingham, Derby, Lincoln, and Stamford. So they were based in that, based in that area. And also in the north, in Bernicia, and up north. So he didn't actually get rid of them, but he sued for peace. So they stayed in the country and didn't fight. How long would that last? So the other reason that Alfred is known as the Great is because of his writing. Now he has got a biographer, so again, a bishop, and the bishop was named as Asa. So we've got the history of Alfred, and trust me, it's very biased in his favour. And he also started the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which is the most famous story of what happened to the Anglo-Saxons through the line of Wessex. Starts off at year 1, yeah, right, and then goes up through. But it has these, I told you about the oral traditions, so there's a lot of the oral traditions are written down as if they were true. Now, I know George Washington, him of America, was very keen on Hengist and Horsa, and he wanted those actually in the Constitution. Thank God the Americans decided not to. So we've got Alfred the Great, this big seat of learning, trying to get everybody to be able to read or write. He sorted the laws out, he did lots of charters, and he got the political situation. So we've now got it split into three. So we've got the ealdorman, it was a paid role, and they were in each of the Anglo-Saxon areas, so each of those counties. Then we've got the thanes, which were the fighting men, and then the churls, which were the ones that did all the work, so the important ones. Yeah. So he left the country in a really good way, apart from the fact we've got all these Danes in the country. What are we going to do with them? So his son was called Edward. Unfortunately for him, there is another Edward, so in later years he's called Edward the Elder. Trust me, there's nothing old about him. He really wasn't. Oh, excuse me. He was a mighty warlord. And he decided he wanted those pesky Danes out. He couldn't do it on his own, though. And he had an older sister, who I think is on the screen. And her name was Athelflaed. And she'd been married off to the Earl, or the Ealdorman of Mercia, called Alfred. No, he wasn't. He was called Athelred, forgive me, Athelred. So she was married to him. Now, he was a lot older than her. This happened a lot. Women were used mostly for marriage deals, for bargains. So she was married off to get that linking between Mercia and Wessex. And she worked with him. So from 9/11, he wasn't very well. And he died. And she was elected to be the Lady of the Mercians. So she wasn't a queen, we don't go that far, but she was the Lady of the Mercians. And she ruled the Mercians from 9/11 until she died in 918. Now that not only meant she sat at home looking after the children, they had one child. She was out fighting. She invaded Wales. She put up fortifications. She started burhs, which are fortified towns. She was called on for help. Northumbria called on her for help when the Danes invaded. She was really, really important. And together with her brother, Edward, they pretty much pulled England back to where it should be and sent the Danes away. In fact, she was the one that took over Leicester, one of the 5 boroughs, and her brother did Stamford. So she's really, really important, and not many people have heard of her. Now, on there, I think it's a commemorate. She lived in Tamworth, she died in Tamworth, and they put up a memorial to her in 2018. It's very sad. But we have her voice. Yeah, we have her voice. So that's really good. She is a mighty woman, and without her, we would not be the country we are today. So I'm very impressed with her. We don't know much about her, though. I wish I could tell you a story all about her. I would love to. There is a Mercian version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. She is not in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles because she wasn't from Wessex. She was a Mercian. Really frustrating. And the Mercians didn't get on with the West Saxons. Okay. So then we move on to Athelstan. But again, Athelstan, who was the grandson of Alfred, he actually was brought up by Athelflaed in the Mercian court. So he is part Mercian. And I think it was all to do with Alfred trying to get Mercia and Northumbria, Wessex all together. I think it worked. Athelstan became king after his dad died. So he became king. And I'm hoping you've heard of Athelstan, because although his stepmom, who he brought up with, Athelflaed, had died, so he becomes king in 924. And he is the first one that we can call king. He was the Rex Tote Britanniae, the king of all England. And he's a really important, in fact, he's probably the most important of the early Anglo-Saxons. But he couldn't have done it without Athelflaed. Yeah, there was a bit of a fight going on. I'm not going to tell you about the fight. I told you about the Athelings all getting together. Yeah, there was a bit of fight before he became king, but he managed to get there, and it was because he'd been brought up by Athelflaed. Can you tell I'm a bit of a fan? How am I going? What's the time, please?
I don't have the time, but tech has 25.
Oh, that's fine then. Yeah. Right, are we all right with that so far?
Yeah, good.
Right. I'm going to jump on a little bit because I want to talk about the women. And I want to talk to you about Winflaid. I haven't got a slide for this. So Winflaid, we don't know really who she was. Yeah, it's a bit of a common theme, isn't it? But we do know that she was rich. We do know that she was rich enough to write a will. And her will is the first will that we have ever by a woman. So it's quite an important document. So she wrote the will about 940. Okay, now there is a possibility, I'm not going to say it's definite, but there's a possibility that her daughter was married to Edmund, who was the King of England, and she had two sons, Eadwy and Edgar, who were also kings of England. So she might be the mother-in-law and the grandmother of 3 kings of England, but we're not sure. I'd like to think she was, but we don't know. And she wrote her will, and she's, so 940, she's very rich. She's got lots of clothes. And in fact, the monks didn't like the fact that rich women had lots of clothes and were berating them for having lots of clothes. And she's reported to have said back, "You can be prideful in a hair shirt," which I think is quite a good quote. So she gave away lots of her property. So we know what she gave away and who she gave it to. I'm not going to bore you by going through everybody, and trust me, I can't remember all the names. But she lived down on the Dorset-Wiltshire border. She had at least 4 properties. We know of 2, one of which has been excavated, so we know what it looked like. It was about 45 foot by 25 foot, just on the basis, plus then a cook room and stables and whatever. We also know she had slaves. Now that's not as bad as it seems, because Christian Anglo-Saxon England believed in slavery. It was expected. About 1/3 of the population were slaves, yeah, which you may not have known about. In fact, if I remember in COVID, there was a big row in Bristol. A big row in Bristol about all of the slave trade from Bristol. Yeah, well, maybe they should have gone back a bit further, because it was quite common in the 9th century for them to deal in slaves. Yeah. So we know that Winflaid had slaves. She actually set 50 free. So we don't know how many she had, but she's setting 50 free. She had quite a few. Some of them she gave to her daughter. She had a daughter called Athelflaed, and she was unmarried, so she left her the property, which was a farm, and chests of goods. And in fact, she gave away a brooch that was worth about 6 months' pay to a best friend. So we know she was quite rich. At the time, there's something called the Anglo-Saxon Reformation. Have you heard of that? No. It's something we don't get told about. Now, because there'd been lots of fights, lots of problems with the Danes, there were a lot of widows. So a lot of women that had lost their husbands while they were fighting, or even some that had grown up and hadn't married. Now, these were rich because, as I said to you earlier, they were allowed to own their own property and they were allowed to bequeath their goods. So they had lots of land, they had lots of goods, and they started by weaving, commissioning property, jewellery, all that was going on. So we were fairly peaceful in the 10th century, in the mid-10th century. So they were able to get all of this out into the country. So we've got lots of evidence, lots of archaeological evidence of things that were being made, things that were being manufactured. And at the time as well, it's the growth of the city. So trades were moving into the cities and out of the walls. So you've got cities expanding. And this was actually driven by the women. So the women were actually encouraging the trades to move together. There was also a move for there were settlements. So people would be isolated in settlements. And the settlements started coming together a lot more. And this is the start of villages. So pretty much the 10th century is the start of life as we know it, Anglo-Saxon England. Now I'd like to talk to you a bit later on about somebody that really took this to its nth degree. So I'm going to whiz on a few centuries, and I want to talk to you about somebody called Emma of Normandy. Yeah? Emma. Now, Emma's quite an important and quite interesting character. I quite like Emma. She's a woman after my own heart, if I'm honest. Have you heard of Ethelred? Right. Ethelred was the King of England. I mentioned to you Eadwy and Edgar, so he was the son of Edgar. Edgar was known as the peacemaker. So it was, as I say, right up until he died in 975. It was really peaceful. Unfortunately, Ethelred comes to the throne and it all goes to pot. Ethelred's name means good counsel. He's known as Ethelred, the evil counsel, for a reason. Oh, I didn't tell you. Can I just go back to Athelflaed? Athelflaed's name means noble beauty, which I should have told you that. That's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. So Ethelred, the good counsel. There's a funny story. Can I tell you a funny story? I'm all right to go off on one. Ethelred, the story is, he was Edgar's son, and he was being christened in the font. So the Archbishop Dunstan was christening him, putting the water on him in the font, and he empties his bowels into the font. and the Archbishop said, "Oh, that's a bad omen, isn't it?" Yeah. He was a bit of a bad one. I could go on all day about the bad things Ethelred did. I won't, because I don't want to bore you to death. And it is about women, so I don't really want to talk about him too much. He wasn't good. He never rode with his army into battle, so totally different to any of the other leaders. He couldn't get on with anybody. He was falling out with everybody all the time, and that means killing them. And he didn't kill them in a nice way. He liked to put out their eyes, cut off their nose, cut off their ears, chop their hands and feet off and leave them in a field. Not very nice. So he wasn't a pleasant man and a bit of a coward. But in 1001, he marries the sister of the Duke of Normandy. Now, you know where this is going, don't you? If I say the sister of the Duke of Normandy, you know where it's going to end up. But her name was Emma. So she's called in history as Emma of Normandy. So she marries, and they have children, and they're supposedly quite happy until they get kicked out of England for being totally incompetent. So they go over to Normandy with their children, and their children are Edward and Alfred, and they go on, the Danes just attack everywhere, and the people then decide, actually, we're better off with the incompetent Ethelred than what's going on, and they invite him back again. I mean, why would you? So he comes back, but they leave the children in Normandy. They come back on their own. So they come back, and he only lasts another couple of years. Seems to be a theme here. And he does die. But he reigned for 37 years, so that's quite a long time. And he dies. And then this is where we get our Scandinavian history from. So after he's died, the Danes come over again, they invade, and we have Sven Forkbeard, who's pretty bloodthirsty, I'm going to say. And his son becomes king, and his son is Canute. Or Knut. King Canute. Yeah. Now you can decide whether you like Canute or you don't like Canute. There's the story that he took his throne to the seashore and commanded the waves not to wet him. Now you can be on either side. You can be, what an idiot, or he was showing people that the regal law doesn't last everywhere. It is finite. Take your side. I don't know. He was okay, a bit bloodthirsty, but the first thing he did was he married Emma. So she's been married to Ethelred, now she's married to Canute. I can only see one tiny issue with this. The fact that she was 10 years older than him doesn't matter. But Canute was already married. So he was already married to Algifu, and he didn't get rid of her, so he was married to 2 women. And he didn't really think there was a problem to this. Okay. Long time ago, I'm not going to judge. So he rules with his 2 wives. She gives birth to a son, and he becomes king of Norway and Denmark. So now Emma is queen of England, Norway, and Denmark. And along with that comes lots of money. She's very, very rich. And she commissions a book to write about her life, Encordia of Emma of Normandy. So she must have been really well-to-do. She owned lots of land. She was one of the most important women in the whole of the Western era. And probably one of the most rich as well. Don't forget, queen to 2 kings. But it can't last forever, can it? And Canute dies. Now, after Canute dies, there's a bit of a battle going on, because remember, he's got 2 wives. And both these wives want their sons to become king. So we've got Egifu on one side and Emma on the other. Problem is, Emma's son, Arthur Canute, is in Norway. Very difficult to become king of England when you're in a different country. So we've got Algifu she's trying to get her son Harold as king. Now, for a couple of years, this is going on, and they're fighting amongst each other. A propaganda war. But Algifu actually wins, because she gives a good party to all of the lords that do the voting and gets them well and truly drunk. Gives them gifts and says, make my son king. So they did. It worked. Well done, Algifu. And they banish Emma. Oh dear. So she's starting to stir things from Normandy. She's winding up her son. And in the end, he's like, do you know what? I'm going to do it because my mum wants me to. So he gets in these ships and he comes over. So we're about 1040, 1041. 1041, he's coming over. I'm going to make it. So he comes over. The thing is, Harold dies in mysterious circumstances. We don't know why. So when Harthacnut comes over, the people of England ask him to become king. I think they're a little bit worried he's going to take it out on them. He invites his mum over, but unfortunately his mum is built on revenge, and they are foul. They break up monasteries, they destroy cities, they banish people. They are not nice. Luckily, he only lasts, guess what, 2 years. So when he dies, we then have a king. I need to go back a bit. King Edward. Now, if you remember, I told you that Emma had 2 sons that she took to Normandy. She had Edward and Alfred. See where I'm going? She invites Edward over, and in fact, Edward actually comes over, and he's sort of joint ruler with Harthacnut for a bit. So now we have Emma, who's been the wife of 2 kings, and is now the mother of 2 kings. So she was the mother of Harthacnut, and now she's the mother of Edward. And if you know your history, you know that Edward was later called the Confessor. because of his piety. He wasn't all pious, he was, but he was also quite vicious. So he stamps his authority, he's now king, and the lovely Emma dies in 1052. Now, I'm just going to finish it off. Unfortunately, there's no women in this little bit, but I'll just finish it off. In 1051, he invites William of Normandy to come over to England because he doesn't have an heir. Now, we think that he offered William the throne of England because he didn't have an heir. Now, he was married. He was married to Edith, who was the daughter of Harold, daughter of Godwin, who was the father of Harold Godwinson. Yeah? So, she says that he wasn't interested in her, and he didn't have sex with anybody. Don't know whether or not. He might just not have fancied her, I don't know. But he didn't have any children. William goes back, and I think maybe the seed was sown, whether or not he offered him the kingship, maybe the seed was sown then in 1051. Because when he dies in 1066, I think, as we all know from our school history, William thinks he should be king and decides to invade. Yeah. Sorry?
This is a famous Norman invasion.
Yes, it is. Yes, which is where I started off. So, yeah. So the Normans came over, and probably, yeah, he probably was the natural heir of Edward. So he came over. Yeah. The problem was, when the Normans came, they had a completely different way of looking. So in Anglo-Saxon times, as I said, the women were able to divorce, they inherited, they could give their land, they wrote the wills. After the Normans, this all stopped. They brought over a patriarchal system. Instead of having the Wighton meet together to elect somebody to become king, it went to the eldest son, didn't go to a daughter. The women had no rights. They were seen as the wife of somebody or the mother of somebody. Edith, who was the wife of Harold Godwinson, who died, she was deprived of all her lands, and guess what? Sent to a nunnery. Yeah. Women sort of lost their way because of this patriarchal system of the Normans. And in fact, one of my favourite characters is Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry I. Her epitaph, fantastic woman, but her epitaph is the daughter of Henry, the wife of Henry, the mother of Henry, which I find quite sad. And as I say, women only started getting their rights back in the 19th century, which is where I came in. That's it. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Kay while she still has the stage? Any final questions or remarks? Or we have one.
Yes, I'm very grateful because I'm probably a genuine Saxon, born in what is now the free five-star Saxon in Germany. And I can trace it back to the 15th century. But are the Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon, are the Saxons who talk about the same people that are now the German Saxons? Is there a link?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because as you know, Germany wasn't unified until quite late.
Oh, 1870.
Yeah, Bismarck. So, again, it's exactly the same in Germany as it was here. Lots of lands, lots of different territories, and lots of groups all together. So, yes, so the Saxons from Germany, yeah, would come over. So.
The reason we know so little, or relatively little, about the Anglo-Saxon part of it, is did the Normans destroy, I only heard a little bit about it.
Yeah.
The Normans destroyed a great deal, didn't they?
Oh, they did, yes. As I say, they didn't like the women, so a lot of the women's, the voice of the women was destroyed by them. It's not just them. Through history, people have destroyed historical fact, and I don't know why they do it. One people come in and then destroy the whoever they've dominated. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, strange, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult. But we are learning a lot more through archaeology, which is really good. So we can learn a lot. It's just a shame that some of the voices are missing.
Some failures are
Yeah.
within its own fault.
Yeah. Well, do you think? Yeah.
It's continued emphasis on looks and accumulating things.
Yeah.
You're told again that walk around the streets.
Yeah. What came first, though?
I don't know.
Did we get put into that position? Yeah, maybe. We were very much in the background and very much used as like a bargaining tool. So we were married off quite young, and we didn't have control of anything. So yeah.
I think because of childbearing, it's actually.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that have gone wrong, I think we could trace back to childbearing. It depends whether how many babies you should have, and whether how awful it is to get rid of a pregnancy. That better is continuing. And therefore it's very interesting to hear about.
That's why I'm quite interested. Athelflaed, her and her husband, they only had one. They had a daughter, Ecgfrith, and supposedly she had such a bad time in childbirth, she refused to have any more.
Doesn't mean she had no more sex.
Yeah, which would normally be, as you say, you normally would have lots of children, but she just had the one. So that's another thing.
I'll just need to move on to allow other people some time for questions. Well, obviously, Kay will be, you're around after this talk
Yes,
anyways, aren't you? So if you need to obviously follow up, Kay will be there in case you do.
Yeah.
Any other questions, anecdotes to ask? Getting a lot of shakes of heads here.
No,
So we have
okay.
one more round of applause for Kay. My usual closing note. Thank you all for attending. Really good telling of the history, actually, given the fact that obviously you don't know so much about it. And very tragic to hear about the 16-year-old double widow. How times have changed. Thank you all very much, so much for attending today's Heritage Talk. Like I mentioned, this is part of our 600th anniversary, and we've got a bunch more of these talks coming. Like I said, these usually happen every other week, but this talk is actually a week early. So our next talk is actually in 3 weeks' time. That's September 5th. That will be one of our wonderful heritage volunteers, Jean Fenwick, doing the second part of her mini-series on the stained glass windows of Hull Minster. So if you want to know anything about the stained glass windows, especially the more modern ones and their kind of interpretations of modern history through these great medieval art styles, please do attend that talk. Jean is the most knowledgeable person probably in the entire city of Hull about what goes on in these windows. I will leave you with the usual final speaking points. It is obviously lunchtime, and if you're hungry, and if Kay has, in her words, bored you to death with her Anglo-Saxon histories, then please do have a bite or a drink at the cafe before you leave today. And as always, running the Minster is a very expensive ordeal. So if you do have the ability to be able to leave us a donation through cash or card, whatever is easiest, please do. Thank you all very much for attending, and I'll see you hopefully at the next talk. Thank you. There's donation points at the doors, so you can just drop one in.
But how do I know more?